All right, so you're here, which means, like us, you're probably hooked on those big history mysteries, right? You want to get to the bottom of things, see all the different sides, but, not get bogged down in a ton of details.
Right.
Well, good news, you're in the right spot. Because today, we're going to dive deep into the mysteries surrounding one of the most iconic monuments of the ancient world, the Great Sphinx of Giza. Now, most people, they kind of know the standard story, the one that puts its construction like around 2500 BC during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. But hold on, because things are about to get really interesting as we explore a totally different possibility.
A narrative that suggests this colossal monument could be way, way older. Yeah, get ready for some serious aha moments, because we're going to unpack all the arguments that challenge that traditional timeline.
Absolutely. Think of this as like your express lane to understanding this debate, one of the most enduring debates, I'd say, in archaeology.
Yeah.
We're going to break down the evidence, the reasoning behind those alternative viewpoints about the Sphinx's true age. We're not trying to overload you with a bunch of obscure data or anything like that. No. We want to give you a clear picture of the main points, drawing from archaeological findings and some seriously fascinating alternative theories.
Definitely. It's all about giving you the tools to really grasp this debate.
Right. So to set the stage, let's just quickly touch on that widely accepted view, the one you find in most history books, the one that most Egyptologists subscribe to. They generally believe this Sphinx was built, like we said, around 2500 BC during the fourth dynasty of ancient Egypt, specifically during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre.
Right.
And the main reasons for this dating, well, it's pretty straightforward when you look at it. First, you've got its location. I mean, it's right smack dab in Khafre's pyramid complex.
Yeah.
Almost as if it's, part of the same grand architectural scheme. And then there's those stylistic similarities between the Sphinx's face and known depictions of Pharaoh Khafre himself.
Yeah, it's a connection that makes a lot of sense on the surface, especially when you consider the layout of the entire Giza Plateau. But what's truly captivating is this persistent counter-narrative, right? This idea that the Sphinx might have a much longer, much more mysterious history than we initially thought. And it's fueled by some seriously compelling lines of investigation.
Okay, let's jump right into the first big challenge to that traditional timeline, the evidence of water erosion. This is where things get really, really interesting. A lot of geologists, especially a guy named Dr. Robert Schuck, have spent a lot of time studying those weathering patterns on the Sphinx in its enclosure.
Yeah.
And their argument is that those deep vertical grooves, those are telltale signs of prolonged and heavy rainfall.
Right, exactly. Extended periods of significant rainfall.
Exactly. Now here's the thing that really throws a wrench into the conventional timeline. The Giza Plateau. It hasn't seen that kind of heavy rainfall for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
Certainly not within the time frame of Khafre's rule, if he built it in 2500 BC. I mean, we're talking a completely different climate back then.
And what makes Schuck's argument so strong, so convincing, is the level of geological detail he brings to the table. He hasn't just looked at the erosion patterns on the surface. He's gone deeper, analyzing the very composition of the rock, the specific minerals present, and the nature of the erosion itself. And his analysis, it suggests that it's way more consistent with water-induced weathering than with the typical explanations offered by mainstream Egyptologists.
What do they usually say?
Well, the usual suspects are wind and sand erosion, right? The idea that over thousands of years, wind and sand could have sculpted those features. But Schuck, he's pushing back on that, and he's got the geological evidence to back him up.
Really interesting. So based on Schuck's research, when does he think this period of major rainfall, this heavy rain, when does he think that actually happened?
He places it in the Neolithic period, the New Stone Age.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, that predates dynastic Egypt, the period of the pharaohs, by millennia. So if he's right, we could be talking about an initial carving of the Sphinx thousands of years before 2500 BC. That's a huge difference.
So if Schuck is right, we're talking about a Sphinx that was already ancient, already weathered by all that rain long before Khafre was even around to supposedly commission its construction. It's kind of mind-blowing. But of course, the conventional view, the mainstream view, they have a counter argument here, right? They say that wind and sand abrasion, they say that groundwater, all those things could also explain the erosion we see on the Sphinx.
Yeah, and to be fair, those are definitely factors in how rock formations weather over time. You can't just dismiss those processes. But as you pointed out, it's the depth of the erosion and the specifically vertical nature of that undercutting that really makes this debate so fascinating. It's hard to explain those features with just wind and sand alone.
It really keeps that debate alive, yeah. And speaking of things being alive, the Sphinx isn't just what we see above ground, right? There's stuff going on beneath the surface too.
Yeah.
And this brings us to our second challenge to that traditional timeline. The findings from the seismic survey. This is where things get a little spooky.
Yeah, a little mysterious, that's for sure.
Right. So back in the 1990s, a geophysicist named Dr. Thomas Dobecki and his team, they conducted this seismic survey around the Sphinx. And the data they gathered was definitely thought-provoking. It revealed a number of anomalies beneath the structure, these indications of potential chambers and tunnels that to this day haven't been fully explored.
And this is where those more unconventional interpretations really start to take hold. Some researchers, they propose that these anomalies, they're not just like random quirks of geology, which, to be fair, is the more cautious, the more mainstream interpretation, right? The idea that these could just be natural formations. But some folks, they suggest that these anomalies could actually be signs of a deliberately constructed underground complex. I mean, think about the implications, right? If these are indeed artificial structures, it could point to a level of sophisticated engineering that predates the accepted timeline for the Sphinx, potentially even hinting at a more advanced civilization that existed long before the pharaohs.
It's like there's this whole other world hidden beneath the one we can see.
Exactly. Like the Sphinx is just the tip of the iceberg, and the seismic survey, it gave us a little peek into that hidden world. The survey data showed, for example, some variations in density beneath the Sphinx, which could be consistent with the presence of like hollow spaces or different materials.
So it's not just random rock down there.
Right. There's something else going on.
It's so cool. But again, for our listeners, it's really important to emphasize that mainstream science, they're really cautious about interpreting this data. They say that seismic readings, they can sometimes be ambiguous, open to interpretation, and natural geological formations, they can sometimes produce signatures that look similar to like man-made structures. So until there's some physical excavation, until we actually go down there and see what's what, these findings remain, open to debate.
Absolutely. I mean, the seismic data, it gives us these tantalizing hints. But on its own, it doesn't provide like absolute proof for those more alternative theories. And this leads us perfectly into our third challenge, which takes us from the ground below to the sky above, the theory of astronomical alignments.
Ah, yes, the cosmic connection. This is where guys like Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock really come into the picture. They're proposing this grand cosmic connection between the monuments of Giza and the stars.
Yeah.
The basic idea is that the Sphinx and the pyramids, they weren't just placed randomly on the Giza Plateau. No, they were intentionally aligned with specific constellations. But not just any constellations, at a very, very specific point in time.
Yeah, we're not talking about just like general alignments here. We're talking about precise alignments that correspond to a particular moment in the distant past.
Right, and the alignment they're talking about is between the Sphinx and the constellation Leo,
right,
and the three main pyramids of Giza with the stars of Orion's belt, and the date they point to, 10,500 BC.
Way back. And what's really mind-blowing about this theory is the worldview it suggests. If this alignment is accurate, if it was intentional, then it means that those monuments were built to mirror a specific configuration of the heavens, a configuration that existed thousands of years before the traditional date for the Sphinx. It implies a level of astronomical knowledge and a spiritual connection to the cosmos that we don't typically associate with dynastic Egypt.
So they weren't just building tombs, they were creating a map of the stars on Earth.
Exactly. And this idea it's known as the Orion correlation theory. It basically says that the entire Giza necropolis, it was a terrestrial reflection of the stars, with the Sphinx in its, lion form, symbolically representing the age of Leo.
Oh, I see, like astrological ages.
Exactly. And the age of Leo, based on, astronomical calculations, It's thought to have occurred around, you guessed it, 10,500 BC. So if they're right, it means that these monuments were conceived within a totally different intellectual and spiritual context than we typically think about when we think about ancient Egypt.
It's a powerful image. These ancient builders mapping the cosmos onto the sands of Giza. It really captures the imagination. But like with the other challenges we've discussed, the mainstream archaeological community, they're not totally sold on this idea. They often point to what they see as inaccuracies in the precise alignments that Bovall and Hancock proposed. And they say there's a lack of hard archaeological evidence that directly links the construction of the monuments to that specific astronomical configuration so many millennia ago.
Yeah, the debate really centers on the level of precision in those alignments and whether they fall within a margin of error that's reasonable enough to suggest intentional design. And, while the Orion correlation theory is certainly thought-provoking and it encourages us to think about the astronomical knowledge of ancient cultures in a new way, it does rely on interpretations of astronomical data and symbolic associations that aren't, universally accepted within the scientific community.
Right. It's still a theory, even though it's a very fascinating one. Okay, now let's shift gears a little bit. Let's move away from the scientifically observable, at least for now, and delve into something a bit more legendary. We're talking about the myth of the Hall of Records. This is where we introduce a really interesting character into the mix, the American psychic Edgar Cayce.
Yeah, Edgar Cayce, a fascinating and controversial figure. In his trance readings, Cayce claimed that there was this hidden chamber beneath the Sphinx, often referred to as the Hall of Records. And according to Cayce, this hall, it contains a complete history of a lost civilization, often linked to the mythical Atlantis, a history that holds profound secrets about the origins of humanity and how we developed as a species. He even went so far as to predict that this Hall of Records would be discovered sometime in the late 20th century.
Wow, a specific prediction.
Yeah, very specific.
And as we sit here today, obviously that grand undeniable Hall of Records, it hasn't been found, at least not officially.
Yeah.
But the legend, it persists. And it often gets linked to those seismic anomalies we talked about earlier.
Right. For some people, those potential chambers beneath the Sphinx, they could be part of this fabled Hall of Records, this repository of lost knowledge. This is a very romantic idea.
It is, but for our listeners out there, it's really important to understand that Edgar Cayce's claims, they're generally considered pseudoscience by the vast majority of archaeologists, historians, scientists. It's a fun idea, but it doesn't really have any solid evidence to back it up.
Yeah, and while the concept of a hidden archive filled with ancient secrets is undeniably captivating, it's important to separate those ideas from the empirical, verifiable evidence that we use in archaeology and history. As of right now, there's no scientific proof to support the existence of this Hall of Records, and any connection between Cayce's predictions and those seismic anomalies, it remains purely speculative. I mean, as we discussed, those anomalies have, perfectly plausible natural explanations.
Right, we can't just jump to Atlantis every time we find something unusual.
Exactly.
But speaking of unusual, this brings us to a theory that some might consider a kind of middle ground, a compromise between the geological evidence that points to an older Sphinx and the archaeological context that links it to Khafre. It's the idea of an older core.
The older core theory. Yeah, this is an interesting one.
It is. The suggestion here is that the very foundation of the Sphinx, the original carving, it might actually date back much further in time, perhaps even to that Neolithic period we've been talking about. And that later pharaohs, like Khafre, they came along and did some serious renovations, recarving, restoring, basically just, sprucing up a pre-existing structure.
So in this scenario, the ancient Egyptians, they weren't the original architects of the Sphinx. They were more like inheritors. They took this ancient monument and reinterpreted it, adapted it to fit their own beliefs and their own iconography. It's a really interesting thought. It kind of flips the script on how we usually think about the origins of the Sphinx.
It does. It really does. And it raises some fascinating questions about the capabilities of those pre-dynastic cultures.
Yeah.
If they did build the original core of the Sphinx, it means they had a level of sophistication, a level of engineering skill that we don't typically give them credit for. And this actually ties into our next point, which is the rather strange lack of inscriptions on the Sphinx itself.
Oh yeah, the missing inscriptions. This is a key point that often gets brought up in these debates.
Because, think about it, for such a massive, a colossal, and incredibly important monument, you would naturally expect to find some inscription, some clear declaration etched in stone, stating who built it and when. But we don't really have that for the Sphinx.
Not in the way you'd expect. I mean, we do have the dream stele of Thutmose IV, which stands right between the Sphinx's paws, and does mention Khafre, but, and this is important, it doesn't actually say that Khafre built the Sphinx.
Oh, that's a good point. So what does it say?
It basically tells the story of a dream that Thutmose IV had. In the dream, the Sphinx appeared to Thutmose and promised him the kingship if he cleared away all the sand that had buried the Sphinx up to its neck. And the inscription, it mentions Khafre in connection with, the local area and some restoration work, but it doesn't explicitly say Khafre built this. It's more like a reference to Khafre within the context of Thutmose's dream and his subsequent actions.
So it's not a foundational inscription like the kind you'd find on a pyramid or an obelisk, where the pharaoh is boasting about their great construction project.
Exactly, and that lack of a clear, unambiguous inscription directly linking the Sphinx to a specific pharaoh, it's really unusual for a monument of this size and importance. And it's a key argument that's often used by people who believe in a pre-dynastic origin for the Sphinx, a time before the widespread use of hieroglyphic writing for those kinds of, grand proclamations.
It makes you wonder why would they want to take credit for building something so amazing it doesn't quite add up?
It's a good question, and it leads us to another interesting line of thought. The idea that building the Sphinx, actually carving this thing out of solid rock, might have required a level of technology that we don't traditionally associate with the ancient Egyptians, at least not the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom, the period when the Sphinx is traditionally dated.
Right, because we're talking of a truly massive sculpture here, and the precision of the original carving, especially the lion's body, before all the later restorations, is pretty remarkable. So what are these alternative theories suggesting? Like, what kind of technology are we talking about?
Well, some people propose that achieving that level of scale and precision with the tools and the techniques that we know the ancient Egyptians had at that time, that it would have been incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible. So they suggest that maybe, just maybe, there was some lost technology involved, something we haven't discovered or something we don't fully understand.
Okay, and this is where we circle back to those theories about lost civilizations, right? Like Atlantis.
Exactly. The idea that maybe those lost cultures, they had advanced tools, knowledge, maybe even technologies that we've lost to time.
Yeah.
And that those things allowed them to create monuments like the Sphinx with relative ease.
It's a very tantalizing idea, but again, for our listeners, it's really important to remember that mainstream archaeology, they haven't found any hard evidence to support these claims of lost technology or lost civilizations.
Right. Mainstream archaeology has uncovered a lot of evidence that shows just how ingenious and capable the ancient Egyptians were. They might not have had modern technology, but they were masters of planning, organization, and they were incredibly resourceful in adapting the materials and the tools they had available to them.
Right. They were seriously impressive builders, but still makes you wonder. Okay, so let's take a step back and consider everything we've talked about. The water erosion evidence, which suggests a much earlier date for the Sphinx. The seismic anomalies, which hint at those hidden chambers beneath the surface. The astronomical alignments, with the Sphinx and the pyramids potentially pointing to a specific moment in the distant past. The legend of the Hall of Records, with its tantalizing promise of lost knowledge. The older core theory, which suggests that the Sphinx might be a combination of ancient and later construction. Lack of those clear inscriptions, and the argument that maybe, just maybe, the Egyptians needed some kind of lost technology to create something so massive and so precise. It's a lot to take in.
It really is. It's a rich and multifaceted debate with lots of different angles and perspectives. And it's important for our listeners to remember that while those alternative theories are definitely fascinating and they raise some really, really compelling questions, they remain largely speculative. They're not currently supported by, the vast majority of archaeologists and Egyptologists. The accepted dating of the Sphinx to the 4th dynasty during the reign of Khafre, that's still the the prevailing scientific view based on the available evidence.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so important to engage those critical thinking skills when you're exploring these topics, to really think about the logic and the evidence that's being presented,
Right.
and to understand the difference between rigorously tested scientific research and theories that, while interesting, might not have that same level of solid evidence to back them up.
Right. It's not about just accepting everything you hear. It's about questioning, about digging deeper, and ultimately forming your own conclusions based on the evidence. And what's so cool about the Sphinx is that it continues to be this focal point for these debates. It really highlights how our understanding of the past, it's always evolving, it's always changing as we uncover new information. And it also shows us the limitations of our current knowledge. There's still so much we don't know about the ancient world.
So much we haven't discovered yet.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the age of the Sphinx, we're left with this fundamental question, right? This tension between the traditional archaeological timeline and the arguments, the often very compelling but largely unproven arguments for a much older origin. And the Great Sphinx itself, it stands there, silent, enigmatic, a powerful symbol of the mysteries that still shroud our ancient past, holding on to secrets that we might never fully unravel.
It's a humbling thought, really, and it brings up another question, something for you, our listeners, to ponder as you continue your own exploration of this topic. Considering all the evidence we've discussed, all the different interpretations, what does the enduring mystery of the Sphinx tell us about our own understanding of ancient civilizations? Could there be things about the past, maybe even knowledge or technologies that we haven't even imagined yet, that we haven't even begun to grasp?
That's a really powerful question to end on, and it really speaks to the wonder and the excitement of exploring these ancient mysteries.
Yeah.
It's not always about finding the definitive answers. Sometimes it's about the journey itself, the process of questioning, investigating, and always being open to new possibility.
Absolutely, and that's what we hope we've encouraged here today: a sense of curiosity, a thirst for knowledge, and a willingness to dive deeper into those fascinating corners of history.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, a huge thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the enigma of the Sphinx. We really hope it sparked your curiosity and encouraged you to keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep that open mind as you delve deeper into the mysteries of the past.
Keep searching, keep learning, and keep those questions coming.
We'll be back next time with another deep dive into the intriguing and sometimes downright perplexing corners of history. Until then, happy exploring.